It's officially Pacers Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals. How exciting. Let's talk a little bit of Knicks, a little bit of Pacers playoff defining stats, and why the Western Conference is actually important on a brief weekend Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today I forgot my camera. I'm at the Fever game, which starts in about 30 minutes. I'm in a deep-seated location in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, where I finally have time to talk about the Knicks. It became official last night. Knicks beat the Celtics in 6 games. It's Pacers-Knicks in the conference finals. Haven't had a ton of time to watch those Pacers-Knicks games from the regular season or really dive into New York. So tomorrow, Sunday, will be me looking at the Knicks in a ton of detail and what challenges they'll present the Pacers, some little advantages stuff. And then as the week goes on, Monday, Gavin Shaw from Locked On Knicks and I. Tuesday, the usual where Pacers could get advantages before the series, and then we'll get rolling. But today, I'll look a little bit at the Knicks. We got to talk to Myles Turner, Andrew Nembhard, and Rick Carlisle about them today at practice. I want to talk a little bit about some stats that have defined the Pacers' playoff success so far that I think will still be relevant in the series. And look at the Western Conference for about 2 minutes because, amazingly, the West is actually still relevant for the Pacers. As I'm recording this, Game 7 of Nuggets Thunder is tomorrow. Let's start with the Knicks. Very exciting. Like story-wise, excitement-wise of playoff basketball. Pacers-Knicks is just as cool as it gets, right? How cool is this? Both teams' last finals appearance came at the expense of the other team. 2000 Pacers, their only finals appearance. They beat the Knicks that year. The Knicks last finals appearance in 99, beating the Pacers to get there, right? Came in those battles. They've played 3 Game 7s against each other in playoff history, obviously including one last year, a named rivalry, Hicks versus Knicks. Very exciting. You know, the many moments, Reggie, LJ, Patrick, Roy's block. I mean, all of it, right? This has everything. This has a ton of history behind it, a ton of icons behind it. It's all on TNT, so Reggie Miller's going to be on presumably some of the calls. I don't actually know that, but I would imagine he'll be on at least one. I mean, it's just awesome, right? Like from a junkie of basketball perspective, this is very cool. And even from a non-junkie of basketball perspective, or if you're just a younger fan, great. They played last year. They don't like each other from that, right? It was a long series with lots of twists and turns and storylines, and now they get another crack at each other. The Knicks look different. The Pacers don't. Roster-wise, they're playing different brands of basketball, obviously, and that will be so fun. Like zoom out from the specifics of how these teams play, what they're good at, how the series will look. That part of this is all very fun and exciting to me. I think that will be just a ton of fun to be in the middle of and see how it, changes the course of what the history of these teams, battles have been throughout the league. In terms of the specifics of the current Knicks, some stuff that intrigues me from a Pacers perspective, starting with, like, the top talent is just better than last year. I don't mean that to say that the Knicks are a harder team to beat for the Pacers necessarily. I would like to dive into the series more before getting there, but Brunson is amazing, right? He'll have games in this series. He has games in his career, including many in Knicks Pacers last year, where he's just shooting at the rim like his defender's not there, right? And people have taken that as like an Andrew Nembhard wasn't doing enough defending him stance, which I don't really get. Like he needed to do better. They put Nesmith on him, but he does that to everyone. Ask the Pistons in the first round. Ask the Celtics at times in this round as he hit clutch shot after clutch shot in games 1 and 2. He's just really good. He's like we talked about with Nembhard about guarding him today. Like he's mastered these angles. You just have to try to wear him down to the extent you can. Like the Pacers get that. They did that last year. Karl Towns is a new thing. One, because these first 2 series, you've heard me talk about it. A key battle to me was Myles Turner versus the big because of the stretch element, drag guys out. Who's going to – the clash of styles. Like, is Jared Allen going to dominate this rebounding battle? No. Is Brook Lopez going to post up? No. Like, Cat can actually space, and he is a monster rebounder. The Knicks are an awesome rebounding team. The team that won the rebounding battle won every game of the series last year. Towns just adds a tough element to this series. Now, I don't think Myles Turner is actually going to guard him. If I really think about the Knicks, it's possible he does. I actually think it's more possible that Siakam is guarding Towns and Myles Turner's on Josh Hart. We'll see what the Pacers actually decide to do. A lot of teams have done exactly what I just described. Again, we'll see. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think that two-headed monster part of the Knicks makes them like throw out last year in the playoffs, right? That it's so different. It doesn't matter. And OG is just way better. So that top talent is fascinating. Anunoby is much improved. Cat and Brunson are just so tough, right? I think that is just like strikes me as the most challenging offensive thing the Pacers have faced. Giannis was a beast. They threw everything at him and couldn't stop him. Maybe that is the best offensive thing that they faced. But in terms of a two-headed tandem, Mobley was okay in the first round. Gary Trent hit a bajillion threes. Like maybe that makes him and Giannis the answer. But like this is the hardest combo of two players to guard and strategize for that I think the Pacers have seen in this playoffs so far. And that will be, I think, a lot of where their game plan comes from is one, stopping them as individuals and them working together, and then how that spreads out to the rest of the roster will be interesting to me, especially with, again, OG and Anunoby improving. We talked about John Washburn and I, the top threes of both of these teams on the most recent podcast in this feed. But the other part of this series that's going to be a constant talking point, right? Last year, the war of attrition was part of this. Similarly, this year, the Knicks have a great top five, right? Their starting five is good. I actually have a lot more details I want to provide on that tomorrow, but just big picture right now, let's say this. The starting five is good. Deuce McBride is awesome. That dude makes a billion contested threes a game. Mitchell Robinson's really good on the glass and is like very mobile defensively. I think an underrated defender. And that's kind of it, right? Cam Payne plays some, not very often because Brunson plays a lot. He was amazing in that game 1 win against the Pistons, but he's not like a major focus of their rotation, and like occasionally Precious Achiuwa is in there, but they don't play more than 7 guys a lot and 8 guys hardly at all in the playoffs, in these meaningful games. Whereas everyone has been well documented, and a story of the series will be the depth of the Pacers clashing with that style, right? The Pacers will certainly play 8, McConnell, Mathurin, and topping off the bench behind their usual starting 5. And then they've played 10 or 11 in many games with Bryant and Shepherd and Walker all getting minutes here and there. I haven't really dove into who I think would get minutes in this series, given what the Knicks specifically have. I would imagine, given the history of the Pacers in the playoffs and just like an early glance at the Knicks, it would be Bryant and Shepherd, just like it was last series. We'll see. But that clash will be huge again. Like, can the Pacers' depth wear down a team that rides their starters, or will those starters be so good? Right. The counterpoint that Rick Carlisle said today is obvious. Like, the Knicks' best players play more. Right. What will win out in that clash? Or will that even end up being a defining characteristic of the series? Those two things really strike me from a Pacers perspective. That clash and the star improvement, right? I will dive into the challenges or questions, as we did before the Pacers' first 2 series. Again, I am not saying these are the reasons I think the Pacers will lose when I do them. I just want to look at things that I think will be series defining or challenging for the Pacers. I think I did pretty good for both of those in the first 2 rounds. And then we'll get into the Pacers advantages show next week with the guest, probably on Tuesday, which will be really fun. I just hope people in positions to write or talk about the series, including myself, get enough of the history layout before the series actually starts. If you have the chance, or you're a big reader, if you can library rent or buy Chris Herring's Blood in the Garden and read it before the series starts, highly recommend it to get the sense of like what this used to be as a rivalry. Awesome breed. Chris is the best. I hope I get to see him in MSG. Let's talk about the Pacers in the playoffs a little bit here. I just worked through a story last night about the Pacers pace, and I have some stats that I want to talk about that are playoff defining for the Pacers so far. Before we get into any of that, let's talk about Prizepicks. Basketball season, it's at its peak, and with the playoffs heating up, now is the time to put your sports knowledge to work with Prizepicks, the top platform for daily fantasy sports. Prizepicks makes it easy. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and you're in. Whether it's points, rebounds, or assists, you've got a shot to win up to 2,000 times your entry this week. You could look at Jalen Brunson for more or less than 29 points, or Tyrese Haliburton for more or less than 9 assists. The app takes less than 60 seconds to use. You can mix and match basketball with other sports. When you make your picks, the payout hits fast, sometimes as little as 15 minutes. They have things like Taco Tuesday to give you discounts for more value. It's a blast. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup on Prizepicks. Run your game. Back here on Locked On Pacers, thanks for making us your first listen on this lovely weekend. Locked On Knicks has to be your second listen. They just closed out the Celtics. They're going to the conference finals for the first time in a quarter century. Awesome for the Knicks franchise. Those fans were going crazy outside of MSG. I enjoyed that broadcast quite a bit. Only 2 segments today. Again, I have some very soon coming fever work that needs to get done because their game starts in about 15 minutes. But let's run through a couple things that I want to get to that I've been writing about or working on and looking at that really matter to me when it comes to the Pacers' playoff success. And that is that everything you used to know about what won in the playoffs, a lot of it still matters to some extent. Talented players, isolation scores, things like that. They still matter. They still matter in almost every series. They mattered in Pacers series last year when they played the Celtics. They'll matter in Pacers series again in the future. These aren't not things. But as I was running through some numbers on the Pacers, it has become fascinating to me how much they play not like that and play how they play in the playoffs and still are just crushing teams, right? Them in Minnesota are 8-2. Nobody else is even close to that record. Top passes made team in the playoffs this year. Pacers at 337 per game in their 10 games. Golden State, who's out, at 314 per game. No one else is above 282. The Pacers are throwing 50 more passes per game. Then that's 12 a quarter. That's 1 pass a minute of basketball than any other team still alive. If the Nuggets lose Game 7, the Pacers and Timberwolves will be the only teams in the top half of passes made per game among the 16 playoff teams that are still alive. It is not usual for just like high-level passing and ball movement at that volume to win in a postseason setting, and yet it is the thing for the Pacers. I wrote a story about this in Forbes during the regular season. They want to lead the league in passes. They have tactical reasons chosen for why they want to play that way. And it's showing up now why they like that and why they think that it is the way they should play. It gets everybody involved in a major way. A lot of guys in the team are making shots, and it's been a huge part of them winning, right? First in passes by a mile. Their shot making, right, comes from the assist numbers. You dive into their assist numbers from the passes. 29.7 assists per game for the Pacers in the playoffs. Next up is the Clippers, who are out at 26, and then the Thunder at 25.3. 4 more than anyone else. That is both a stat-making stat and a passing stat. 11 points from assists per game over other teams that are still alive, right? Just ridiculous. 76.4 points per game created from assists. OKC is second at 65.4. The Pacers are passing teams to death. And part of playing fast is moving the ball. The Pacers are extremely good at that. The ball moves faster than any person can run on the court. And so if they want to keep up this tempo, and we'll get to pace in just a second, because that's the other playoffs defining stats to me about the Pacers has been their tempo. But the passing is an understated part of it to me. And Haliburton is the master of it. But as we've seen throughout the playoffs, if he's trapped, he gets off the ball, right? He's passing it at the right level. I think some people think he's overpassing and just shoot more, and I tend to agree with that a little bit. I think the word aggression is the wrong word, but he's figuring out that balance. But as he takes on the hardest assignment or the most unique coverages every game, the Pacers need guys like TJ McConnell, like Andrew Nembhard, like even Pascal Siakam at times to pass, to get the ball moving and not slow the game down, not get too settled into ISO scoring like they did in Game 3 against both the Bucks and the Cavs a little bit. And when they play that way, regardless of who initiates the play, they just look fantastic, right? They look really hard to beat on offense. They're getting good shots and they're making them. And that's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario that I've been thinking about with the Pacers is their passing leading to the open shots that of course go in, or the shots going in leading to space for passing, right? That is kind of hard to actually determine with the Pacers, but it doesn't actually really matter because the shots have gone in enough that this style works and exists and is possible for them to play where they pass the ball way more than anyone else. I think for some teams that don't have the talent of passing to do it, I think some teams are afraid of the turnover volume it could cause them, like the Pacers had issues with turnovers early in the series against the Cavs. Like that's all certainly a fear. There's a reason not every team plays this way, but it's working for the Pacers uniquely. I find that to be extremely interesting as they go against the Knicks team now that does not play. They played fast than they did last year, but still not as fast as the Pacers. And that leads me to pace, right? The Pacers passing is so unique in this playoff setting. So is their pace. And like the trope or the adage or the whatever word you want to use to define a saying is the game slows down in the playoffs, right? Phil Jackson used to say, we're going to grind our opponent down, right? The game slows down. And for some reasons that makes sense. Like when I asked Tyrese about this, he said games are closer in the playoffs, close games slow down, every possession matter. Like, okay, I get all that. But I think the game slows down a little because of the physicality too. Like I understand why people say the game slows down in the playoffs. If you just look at every team's pace in the regular season in the playoffs, it is a little slower. Like, it's not a made-up thing. However, the Pacers want to play faster. in the playoffs. They want to keep their speed. I remember being in MSG last year when the Pacers won Game 7, and a reporter was asking Tyrese about the Pacers, not slowing down. And he says, do you think we've slowed down? Like, half offended by the question. They want to play fast. And if you dive into the numbers, it's crazy, right? If you look at the pace numbers of every team in the playoffs, the Pacers are only 2 of the top 7 are going to make the conference finals, right? If OKC loses, the Pacers will be the only team in the top 6 that's still alive. Cleveland's out, Milwaukee's out, Detroit's out, Memphis is out. They tried to play fast. Everyone else is in the bottom half, right? So slower teams are having success, just like teams that don't pass as much are having success. Those stats go in tandem to me, especially when it comes to the Pacers. If OKC loses, they're the only team still alive with a higher pace than the Pacers, and I think that's largely because they played Memphis, and that series was so fast, and Denver's playing faster than I expected them to in the playoffs. But the Pacers' pace has just been rapid, 99.3 possessions per game, barely below their regular season total, which is shocking. Shocking for a playoff setting, right? Only 2 of the top 7 are going to still be alive after Sunday. And again, Pacers, the only team in the top 5 of playoff pace, top 6 if Denver wins. And they're still alive. I have a story coming about this and why I think it's the case, but it's been really interesting to ask the Pacers opponents about all of this during the playoffs. I asked Kenny Atkinson about it. And he talked about how the Pacers want to speed up. They don't want to slow down. Doc Rivers was like confused why the adage is even a thing. He said, did you watch Magic Johnson on the Lakers? They didn't slow down in the playoffs, right? The Celtics that won 11 titles in a row, or 11 titles, whatever, their first 11 titles, they weren't slowing down, right? Some people don't believe it's real or as real as it says. Everybody knows it's true to some extent because the numbers show it, and the way the game is played kind of requires it at some point in every series. That's why Tyrese, on a team trying to not slow down, did admit there are some tactical reasons that it does. And I mentioned some of them. The other part of it is when you are dialed into what your opponent does and how they want to play, it is a little easier to defend them. You know what's coming. And when you can cut off more and more actions as the possession goes on, and possession gets longer and the game gets slower because there's less possessions per game. So I understand why the playoffs slow down to some extent. I also think it's fascinating that the Pacers are one of the only teams, in fact, they likely will be, the only team left in the playoffs that plays fast and moves the ball to this extent and still walks away with wins. It's hard to do that in a playoff setting without making mistakes, without being disconnected, without your opponent realizing what's happening. And that leads to the final thing, which is they play random, as they call it. A lot of actions instead of plays. They don't not run plays, but like their plays have a lot of actions in them and stuff that they know what's coming, but their opponent doesn't. It's all very interesting. They fly around whenever they can. And the final factor that makes it successful is you can't really prepare for it, right? If it's random, how are you supposed to scout it? Know it's coming. If it's fast, like Donovan Mitchell said last round, you can't practice that fast. You just can't, right? You cannot prep to play that way. You can get used to it in games and be better, but you can't rest during a game. Like you can talk about it, but the wear down effect became a part of the Cleveland series. And so I say all this stuff to say, 8 minutes of stat talk to say, there's a perception of what the playoffs are and how teams usually play in those settings. And in large part, those are true. The Pacers do not care about those adages. They're going to play Pacers basketball come hell or high water, and it's working. Their second straight conference finals appearance is not a fluke. The style works for them, and they're going to keep doing it until someone beats it. Boston beat them last year. The Pacers will hope that they can win this year with that style. I have a story about the speed part of this coming out very soon with thoughts from a lot of the people whose names you just heard. Last thing I want to get to today very briefly, the Western Conference. So Minnesota's in the conference finals again. There's a weirdo alternate universe where the Pacers and Wolves are defending their 2024 finals runs. Regardless, Minnesota won 49 games this year. The Pacers won 50. So if you are a Pacers fan, you are rooting for the Timberwolves in the West because if they win, the Pacers would have home court advantage in the NBA finals. That is fascinating. They would have had it anyway because they beat Minnesota twice if they did not win. But that is why, some people who talked about that last game of the season against Cleveland and were psyched about 50 wins, you could have ended up telling me to shove it if that ended up being the reason the Pacers get finals home court advantage. Who cares about a draft pick? That's a huge deal. Denver has 50 wins also. The Pacers split the 2 games with them 1-1 this season. I've gotten asked a few times who would have home court advantage. It's the Nuggets. The Nuggets had a better conference record. They obviously play in different conferences, but the Nuggets had a better record against the West and the Pacers had against the East. And honestly, even though you're playing in different conferences and that seems like a weird tiebreaker, the West is harder. So I think I'm good with that tiebreaker going the way it does. Obviously, OKC has 68 wins. They have home court the rest of the way. But if Denver wins, they could still host the finals if they beat Minnesota. So that is just something to keep an eye on in the West. I think the Pacers will be rooting for the Wolves, and I think the Pacers will be rooting for every series they're not involved in to go 7 games. And it is now 2:58. The Pacers tip the Fever tip in 5 minutes. I need to go and edit this and get it up as soon as possible. Thank you guys so much for listening on this Saturday. Another episode out tomorrow morning with a deeper dive into the New York Knicks, what challenges they will present the Pacers. Looking forward to that. Thank you all so much for listening to this one. See ya very soon.